The gunfire in his memory never stopped. Not really. It only went quiet enough for him to function. Lagos traffic roared and honked under a heavy afternoon sun. Horns blared. Street vendors shouted over one another, hawking phone chargers, bags of pure water, roasted corn. In the middle of it all, a black convoy of three SUVs cut through the chaos and rolled to a stop outside a glass-fronted hotel. The rear door of the last vehicle opened. A polished shoe stepped down onto the cracked pavement. Joon-ho straightened his jacket and looked out over the noise of the street with the flat, unreadable expression of a man who had not truly smiled in 7 years. His security fanned out around him, four men in dark suits, earpieces catching the sunlight. 20 feet away, a boy's voice cut through the noise, sharp and unbothered by the size of the woman he was arguing with. "Aha, madam, this orange is not fresh-o. This is yesterday's orange wearing today's clothes." The fruit seller, a broad woman, with a tray balanced on her head, planted a fist on her hip. "You, this boy, come out from my front before I use this tray show you fresh." "Use the tray show me fresh?" The boy grinned, spreading his arms wide, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. "Madam, I am trying to help times your business. You should be paying me." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. A woman selling groundnuts nearly dropped her tray laughing. Even a hotel security guard cracked a smile and looked away, pretending not to. Joon-ho stopped walking. His head of security, Mr. Bello, noticed and paused half a step behind him. "Sir?" Joon-ho didn't answer. He was watching the boy, 6, maybe 7 years old, barefoot, dust on his ankles, utterly fearless in front of a woman 3 times his size. Something tugged at the corner of Joon-ho's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the ghost of one, arriving somewhere it hadn't been welcome in a long time. Then a woman's voice sliced through the market noise, high and frightened. "Emeka." Everyone turned. A woman in a faded blue headscarf was actually running through the crowd, shoving past a cart of plantains, her wrapper nearly coming loose at her waist. She grabbed the boy by the shoulder and yanked him back from the edge of the road, just as a motorcycle roared past, inches from where he'd been standing. In the scramble, his collar shifted, and for half a second a thin gold chain caught the sunlight at his throat before disappearing back under his shirt, small enough that nobody watching had any reason yet to notice it. "Are you trying to kill yourself?" I turned my back for 1 second. "Ngozi, I was fine. The man wasn't even close. Don't argue with me, come." She looked up. Just for a second, just long enough to orient herself to see where she was pulling him toward, and she saw his face. Her whole body went rigid. The words died in her throat. The boy Emeka felt her grip on his wrist tighten like a vice. "Nosy, you're hurting my hand." Her lips parted. Her eyes were locked on the man in the dark suit, standing perfectly still by the hotel entrance, 20 feet away, staring back at her now with the first flicker of real attention he'd shown anyone in years. Yonia?" The word dropped into the noisy street like a stone into still water. For Joon-ho, everything else, the horns, the shouting vendors, the roar of traffic, fell away into total silence. It was not the boy's cleverness that had undone him. It was a single word he had not heard spoken aloud in 7 years, from a mouth that had no right to know it. Nobody had called him that in 7 years. Not his board members. Not a single soul on this earth. The only person who had ever used that name was in a grave he visited once a year and never spoke of to anyone. His jaw tightened. His hand at his side curled slowly into a fist. "What did you say?" Ngozi's face drained of color. She realized, half a second too late, exactly what had just left her mouth. I'm sorry, sir. I mistook you for someone." "That name." Joon-ho took a step forward. Behind him, Mr. Bello and the other security men tensed, moving in closer, unsure what was happening, but sensing, for the first time in years, that something had actually rattled their employer. "Say it again. Where did you hear that name?" "Please, sir, I didn't mean." Ngozi was already backing away, pulling Emeka with her, her voice shaking. "We have to go. Emeka, come, now." "Ngozi, what's going on?" Emeka twisted to look between the terrified woman and the stranger closing the distance across the street, utterly confused. "Who is that man? Why is he looking at you like that?" "Move." Ngozi didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed Emeka's hand and pulled him hard into the crowd, ducking between a fruit cart and a wall of shouting vendors, vanishing into the churn of bodies and noise. "Sir," Mr. Bello started forward, ready to give chase. No. Joon-ho's voice was low, but it stopped his entire security detail cold. He was still staring at the space where the woman and the boy had disappeared, his pulse hammering in a way it hadn't in 7 long years. Let them go. He stood there a long moment, motionless in the middle of the chaos. One word echoing through 7 years of silence he'd built brick by brick around himself. Yonia. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But that was not where the story began. To understand why a frightened Nigerian woman would look at a Korean billionaire in the middle of a crowded street and call him by a name no one alive was supposed to know, we have to go back. Not just a few days. 7 years. Back to a version of Joon-ho that almost nobody left in his life would recognize. He had once been a different man, entirely warm, quick to laugh, the kind of billionaire who remembered his driver's children's birthdays and personally brought coffee to interns working late. His employees didn't fear him, they adored him. His success never made him arrogant, because he had never forgotten what it felt like to have nothing. People trusted him because he gave trust freely, generously, sometimes recklessly. His wife, Seo-yeon, was the only person allowed to call him Junie. It began as a joke on their first date, when she'd teased him for being too serious for someone so young and successful, and it stayed with them for the rest of their marriage, a small, private key that unlocked the man underneath the businessman. Their home was loud with laughter, their marriage a partnership of equals who challenged and adored each other in equal measure. Their joy multiplied the day their son was born. Joon-ho, a man who commanded boardrooms without blinking, found himself utterly disarmed by a 3-month-old baby who could not even hold up his own head. He fumbled with diapers. He sang off-key lullabies. Seo-yeon would lean in the doorway, laughing at her billionaire husband being thoroughly defeated by an infant, and he would look up at her with a helpless grin and say, "He's already smarter than my board." It was, by every measure, a life that seemed unbreakable, which made what came next unbearable. Joon-ho had a business partner named Andrew Cho, a man he considered a brother more than a colleague. They had built their empire together from nothing, weathered failed ventures and near bankruptcy side by side, and Joon-ho trusted him with decisions, with secrets, with his home. In the weeks before the attack, there had been small warnings, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them: strange discrepancies in shared accounts. A phone call cut short the moment Joon-ho entered a room, someone unfamiliar, asking careful questions about the mansion's security rotation. Joon-ho waved it off. "I trust the people I call family," he told his head of security, closing the file without reading it. That sentence would haunt him for the rest of his life. The night everything ended began like any other. Seo-yeon had cooked badly on purpose because she thought it was funny to watch her husband pretend to enjoy her burnt rice. Their son slept in the next room. Joon-ho promised him the way fathers promise infants, who cannot yet understand a beautiful future, a life without fear, a world he would build with his own hands just for him. Neither of them knew it was the last night they would ever share. The attack came without warning. Armed men who moved through the mansion like they already knew every hallway, every blind spot, every gap in the guard rotation. Men who had clearly been given more than luck to work with descended in the dark, and what followed was chaos. Shattered glass, distant gunfire, smoke curling under doorframes, screaming swallowed by the roar of flames. Be as not a night this story will dwell on in detail. What matters is what happened inside it, and the question of who had handed strangers the keys to this family's most private hours. A question that would not find its answer for 7 long years. The family's Nigerian maid, a woman named Ngozi, who had worked in the household for 2 years, heard the commotion and ran straight for the nursery instead of the exit. She found the baby alive, crying, untouched. She understood, in that instant, that whoever had come for this family was searching room by room, and that if she was found holding the child, neither of them would survive the night. She wrapped him tightly, slipped through a side door into the smoke and darkness, and ran out of the mansion, out of the city, and within days, out of the country entirely, terrified that whoever had ordered this would come looking for anyone connected to the family. She would not set foot in Korea again. She would be the only person on earth who knew the truth. Joon-ho's son had survived. Seo-yeon did not. She died in the fire that consumed the east wing of the mansion, and her death would remain, for 7 years, the only fact anyone believed about that night. Joon-ho survived, pulled from the wreckage with burns along his arm that scarred permanently, a physical reminder etched into his skin. He woke in a hospital bed asking for his wife first, and then, when no one answered, for his son. The nursery had taken some of the worst damage in the fire, and in the chaos of the wreckage, no one had found a child alive or otherwise. Investigators searched for days. Then, with unusual speed for a case with no actual remains, a forensics report landed on the lead detective's desk, stamped and signed, declaring the infant's death consistent with the fire pattern, closed, final, and quietly funded through a channel only a handful of senior executives could authorize. At the time, grieving and half-broken, Joon-ho never thought to ask who had been the one holding his hand through every phone call with the police, softly assuring him he didn't need to see the file himself. He had lost both in a single night. Or so he believed. Something in him did not simply grieve, it closed. Over the following months, then years, the warmth that had defined Han Joon-ho was replaced, piece by piece, with something colder and harder. His employees stopped joking with him because the man who once brought them coffee now barely looked up from his desk. His business decisions grew ruthless. He built walls no one could climb, because the one time he had trusted completely, it had cost him everything he loved. Trust is a weakness, he told himself, and he built an empire on that belief. There was one relationship, however, that quietly survived the transformation: his partnership with Andrew Cho. If anything, Cho drew closer in the aftermath. Managing details Joon-ho was too broken to face, absorbing responsibilities, becoming, in the years that followed, the one person the cold billionaire still allowed near him. Nobody, least of all Joon-ho, thought to ask why the one man who benefited most from his grief-stricken distraction was also the one who never left his side. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, Ngozi built a different kind of life. She had fled with a baby who wasn't hers, carrying a truth too dangerous to speak, and she settled far from anywhere connected to the tragedy, raising the boy as her own. She named him Emeka. She loved him fiercely, even as the lies she told to protect him grew heavier every year. The one physical proof of who he truly was, a small gold necklace she had found wrapped inside his blanket the night she pulled him from the burning house. A piece she recognized instantly as his mother's. Having seen Seo-yun wear it 100 times, she never let him see. The week they settled into their first real home, she sewed it into the lining of an old mattress and told herself it would stay there forever. A boy who didn't know what he was looking for, she reasoned, could never accidentally find it. To the world around him, Emeka was simply an orphan, a boy nobody claimed, raised by a woman who wasn't his mother, in a city that had never asked where he came from. He believed it himself, as much as Ngozi's careful silences allowed him to believe anything for certain. Emeka grew up with nothing, and somehow seemed to lack for nothing in spirit. He was clever in a way that made adults uneasy, funny in a way that disarmed strangers, and resourceful in ways that kept the two of them fed on the hardest days. Poverty shaped his circumstances, never his character. That certainty lasted 7 years, until 3 weeks before Han Joon-ho ever set foot in Lagos, when Emeka, digging through the house for spare coins to settle a bet with a friend, tore open a seam he wasn't supposed to find, and pulled out a small gold necklace he had never seen in his life. Ngozi found him wearing it the next morning and nearly dropped the pot she was holding. She asked for it back. He refused, twice, with the same stubborn confidence that unsettled adults twice his age, insisting that if it was only going to sit in a mattress forever, it might as well sit around his neck. Worn down, and telling herself it was a small thing, she let him keep it. She had no way of knowing that a billionaire was about to land in Lagos in exactly 3 weeks. 7 years passed this way, a grieving billionaire hardening in Korea, a boy everyone believed was an orphan growing up in Lagos, each unaware the other existed. Until business brought Han Joon-ho to Nigeria, and a chaotic afternoon in a Lagos market put his path directly into Emeka's and left him standing in the noise and exhaust fumes with a name he thought he'd buried ringing in his ears. He didn't chase them that day, but he didn't let it go either. Quietly, without explanation, he asked Mr. Bello to find out who the woman in the blue headscarf was and where the boy she called Emeka lived. It took 3 days. Their first real conversation, when it finally happened, was almost an accident by comparison. Emeka, undeterred by the intimidating stranger in the expensive suit, now turning up near his neighborhood more often than business could explain, walked straight up to Joon-ho, outside a hotel and asked, with complete confidence, whether he needed his shoes shined, because a man dressed like a president should not be walking around looking like he stepped in a gutter. Joon-ho, startled into something between offense and amusement, looked down. His shoes were, in fact, immaculate. There is nothing wrong with my shoes. Exactly, Emeka said. That is why you should pay extra to keep them that way. It was absurd. And for the second time in a week, the first being that half smile he couldn't explain in the middle of a chaotic market, Joon-ho felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward without his permission. That single exchange became something more than a joke. After that first encounter, Joon-ho began quietly creating reasons to return to the area, a delayed meeting here, a coffee he didn't need there, and whenever their paths crossed, the two of them fell into an unspoken ritual. Emeka would name an outrageous price for some small service or item. Joon-ho would refuse, and the two would haggle back and forth with theatrical seriousness until they landed on an absurd compromise, usually settled with a firm, exaggerated handshake, as though sealing a multi-million-dollar merger. It made no financial sense. It made every emotional sense. It was the closest thing to real laughter Joon-ho had allowed himself in 7 years, and neither of them yet understood why it felt like something he'd done before, in another life, with someone else entirely. Word reached Joon-ho of the boy's circumstances, a mother figure struggling to make ends meet, a bright child with no access to real schooling, a life narrowing by the year. Whatever hardened part of him had built walls for 7 years, something in this boy kept finding the cracks. He told himself it was simple compassion. He arranged proper housing, enrolled Emeka in a good school, ensured Ngozi had steady work, brought them both, gradually, into the orbit of his world. His staff noticed the change before he did. The man who once terrified boardrooms into silence now had a child interrupting his conference calls to ask why he needed 6 different phones. The boy questioned his expensive habits, argued with his security team about unnecessary rules, and treated the billionaire's carefully built intimidation like a joke not worth taking seriously. And somehow, instead of anger, Joon-ho found himself, again and again, fighting back a smile his staff had never seen, directed at anyone. He didn't understand why this child unsettled him so deeply. Certain expressions Emeka made when he was thinking hard, a specific way he tilted his head, a stubborn set to his jaw when he refused to back down from an argument, struck something buried and unexplainable in Joon-ho's chest. He told himself it was coincidence. Children were children. But the feeling did not leave. Then, one evening, he noticed the necklace. It was small, easy to miss beneath the boy's collar, but something about its shape caught Joon-ho's eye in a way he couldn't immediately explain. He asked where it came from. Emeka answered simply that it had always been his, that Ngozi told him it was with him when she found him, though she'd never explained more than that. A cold, unfamiliar unease settled into Joon-ho's chest. He said nothing more that night, but he did not sleep. The next morning, still unable to shake it, he did something he was almost embarrassed to admit to himself. He asked Mr. Bello, quietly, to find out anything he could about Ngozi's life before Lagos, where she had come from, who she had worked for. It felt like a small, private thing, the kind of question a man asks only to put his own mind at ease. But a network the size of Han Joon-ho's didn't stay private for long. Half a world away, a message arrived on Andrew Cho's phone from a source inside Joon-ho's Nigerian office, informing him as a courtesy, nothing more, just business as usual, that the boss had quietly ordered a background check on a domestic worker in Lagos. A Nigerian woman. Her name was Ngozi. The name meant nothing to the man who sent it. It meant everything to the man who read it. Andrew Cho set the phone down and sat very still for a long moment, the first flicker of real fear he had allowed himself in 7 years. The next time he saw Ngozi, he studied her more carefully than before, the way she avoided his eyes, the tension in her shoulders whenever he was near the boy. When he finally addressed her directly, asking simple, careful questions about her past, she tried to keep her composure. She nearly succeeded, and then, flustered under his questioning, she made the same mistake she'd made on the street corner 3 days earlier. "Junie, please, I didn't mean any harm." The name hit him harder the second time. Now that he was listening for it, he stood very still. "Who taught you that name?" Her silence lasted only a moment, but it was long enough to answer him before her words did. When she finally spoke, her voice trembling, she admitted the truth in pieces, that she had once worked in his household in Korea, that his late wife had used that nickname constantly, that she recognized him instantly the moment she saw him again, after all these years, and that she had fled the country the same week his home burned down. It confirmed she had truly been part of his family's life, but it answered only one question while raising a dozen more. Why had she vanished so completely, so quickly, in the exact week of the attack? Why had she never once tried to reach him in 7 years? What did she know about the boy she was so desperately trying to protect? Joon-ho did not sleep that week. He quietly pulled old case files from the night of the attack, records he had never had the strength to fully review. What he found made his hands go cold. The forensics report declaring his son's death had been finalized and signed off in days for a case with no actual remains, impossibly fast for any real investigation. And buried beneath it, barely a footnote, sat a second file. A missing persons filing on a domestic staff member, a maid who had vanished the same week without a single follow-up. That file had been closed within 72 hours, stamped insufficient grounds to pursue, authorized by a signature he didn't yet let himself read closely. Two disappearances, in the same house, in the same week, and someone with real money and real reach, had made sure neither one was ever properly investigated. Now, 7 years later, that maid was standing in front of him, in Nigeria, raising a boy of exactly the right age, wearing his late wife's necklace around his neck. A terrifying, impossible hope began to take root in him. He told no one, not even Andrew Cho, who called twice that week asking, with unusual persistence, how the Lagos trip was going. He was afraid of what it might mean if he was wrong, and even more afraid of what it might mean if he was right. Meanwhile, Emeka's questions about his own origins had grown sharper, more insistent, no longer satisfied by Ngozi's careful, incomplete answers. He wanted to know who his parents were, why he had no photographs, no history, nothing but a woman who loved him and a necklace she wouldn't explain. Ngozi felt the lie collapsing under its own weight. She loved this boy enough to have hidden a billionaire's grief from him for 7 years, and she loved him enough to know the hiding had to end. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us continue bringing you more powerful stories like this. The necklace became the final piece. Joon-ho had it quietly examined, and the answer came back exactly as some part of him had already feared and hoped. It had belonged to Seo-yun, a piece she had worn every day until the night she died. There was no mistaking it. The timeline matched the boy's age. Ngozi's disappearance in the exact week of the attack matched. The surviving child theory, once an unbearable hope, had become undeniable fact. He confronted Ngozi one final time, and this time there was nowhere left for her to hide behind careful half-answers. She broke completely, tears streaming as she confessed everything: the fire, the men searching room by room, the choice she made in a single terrified heartbeat to run instead of freeze, and the necklace she had never had the courage to either explain or discard. "He survived," she said. "I saved him. I have kept him safe every day since." Joon-ho's voice, when it came, was barely audible. "Where is he?" She didn't need to answer with words. Her eyes moved, involuntarily, toward the boy sitting across the courtyard, kicking a worn football against a wall, utterly unaware that his entire world was about to change. Joon-ho understood before she said another syllable. He walked toward his son the way a man walks toward something he is afraid will disappear if he moves too fast. Emeka looked up, confused by the expression on the billionaire's face, something he had never seen there before, raw and unguarded and trembling. "There's something you need to know," Joon-ho said, and for the first time in 7 years his voice broke completely. When the truth finally came out, the fire, his mother, the necklace, the name he'd worn his entire life without knowing it wasn't the one he was born with. Emeka sat in stunned silence, processing a lifetime rewritten in a single conversation. Then, quietly, he asked the question that had been living underneath every unanswered curiosity of his childhood. "Why did you leave me?" Joon-ho knelt in front of him, unable to hide the tears now openly falling. "I thought you were dead. I have spent 7 years mourning a son who was alive this entire time." It broke something open in both of them. Emeka, overwhelmed, finally let himself be pulled into his father's arms, the father he never knew existed until that day, holding him the way he had once promised, in a nursery 7 years and a lifetime ago, that he would always protect him. Ngozi watched from a distance, bracing herself for anger, for blame, for the consequence of 7 years of silence. Instead, Joon-ho turned to her and did something she never expected. He thanked her. Whatever fear had kept her from coming forward sooner, whatever imperfect choices she'd made along the way, one truth stood above all of them. She had run into a burning house for a child that wasn't hers, and she had protected him faithfully every single day since. She hadn't stolen his son from him. She had kept him alive. The family that had been destroyed in a single violent night began, imperfectly and carefully, to rebuild itself. It wasn't instant. Joon-ho was not suddenly the effortless father he might have been in another life. 7 years of coldness didn't dissolve overnight, and there were nights he sat outside his son's door unsure how to simply exist as a parent again. Emeka, for his part, was not instantly comfortable in a world of private jets and boardrooms after a childhood of counting coins for bread. There was awkwardness, there was learning. There was, more than anything, patience from a father determined not to lose any more time, and a son slowly allowing himself to trust a man who was, in every practical sense, still a stranger wearing a familiar face. And through it all, their small, absurd ritual returned the price negotiations, the theatrical handshakes, the running joke that had started over a pair of already clean shoes. Except now, when Emeka named some outrageous price with a straight face, and Joon-ho pretended to consider it seriously, the moment carried a weight neither of them could have explained before. It wasn't a joke between a wealthy stranger and a clever street boy anymore. It was a father and son discovering, again and again, that they had been finding their way back to each other long before either of them knew who the other truly was. One evening, watching his son barter cheerfully with a hotel chef over the correct size of a dessert portion, Joon-ho laughed a full, unguarded laugh that startled even him and then, almost as quickly, felt tears rise behind it, because he understood with sudden clarity that this ritual, this small, joyful nonsense between them, had been happening for weeks before he knew he was laughing with his own son the entire time. With his family beginning to heal, Joon-ho turned his attention, for the first time in years, back to the night that started it all. He had spent 7 years accepting the attack as senseless, chaotic violence, the kind of thing that simply happened to powerful men with enemies they couldn't name. But grief had kept him from asking the questions a sharper mind would have asked immediately. Now, with his son safely beside him, he had both the strength and the reason to look closer. He requested old financial records from the months surrounding the attack, documents he had never had the heart to review. Buried among routine transactions, he found something that didn't belong, a payment routed through an obscure shell company, timed suspiciously close to the night his home burned, tied to individuals his own security team had once flagged and been overruled for flagging. Whoever had planned that night had known things only someone close to the family could have known: the guard rotation, the layout of the nursery, the exact night Joon-ho's usual security detail had been quietly reduced for a private family evening. He followed the trail carefully, patiently, the same ruthless precision that had built his empire now aimed backward into his own past. And at the end of it, a name surfaced that stopped his breath, entirely the same name, he now realized, that had been sitting at the bottom of a forensics authorization for 7 years, on a signature line he had once glanced past without reading, because grief had made it too easy not to ask questions. Andrew Cho, the brother he had trusted above all others, the partner who had drawn closer instead of farther in the years after the tragedy, managing what Joon-ho was too broken to manage, standing beside him at every anniversary, every quiet moment of grief, never once suspected, because grief has a way of making the closest hand invisible. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't senseless violence. Someone had deliberately planned the destruction of his family, had orchestrated the death of his wife and the theft of 7 years with his son, and that person had spent the years since offering condolences at industry dinners, shaking Joon-ho's hand, expressing sympathy for a tragedy he himself had created, and was, at this very moment, still sitting on the board of the empire he had helped Joon-ho build. Still one phone call away, still watching. Late that night, Joon-ho sat alone with an old photograph of Seo-yeon, the same one that had survived the fire tucked inside a fireproof drawer he had never been able to open until now. Emeka slept down the hall, safe, finally home. Joon-ho should have felt only relief. Instead, a new and different kind of fire had begun to burn in him, quieter than grief, colder than rage, and far more dangerous than either. Somewhere on the other side of the world, a man who believed his secret had died in that fire 7 years ago had no idea it had just been found. He looked at his wife's photograph for a long moment. "I thought losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me," he said quietly. "Now I know someone chose to take you from me." He set the photograph down gently, the way a man sets down something he intends to protect for the rest of his life, and rose to his feet. On the desk behind him, his phone lit up with a message he had not yet opened from Andrew Cho, sent only minutes earlier, asking, with practiced casualness, when he planned to return to Korea. Joon-ho did not answer it, and I'm going to find out why. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves meaningful stories. We'll see you in our next unforgettable journey.